Hello, I'm Kaiser and welcome to Moose Reads. Before I get started, I want to say that the opinions that I give here are my own opinions. They are extremely subjective. If I dislike a book, it is not a reflection on the author and it is not a reflection on people who do like it. Different people have different tastes, and that's okay. Today, I will be reviewing Captive Prince by C.S. Pacat. This is the first book in the Captive Prince trilogy. It is a fantasy romance. The description says, Damon is a warrior hero to his people, and the rightful heir to the throne of Achielos. But when his half-brother seizes power, Damon is captured, stripped of his identity, and sent to serve the prince of an enemy nation as a pleasure slave. Beautiful, manipulative, and deadly, his new master, Prince Laurent, epitomizes the worst of the court at Vere. But in the lethal political web of the Varetian court, nothing is as it seems, and when Damon finds himself caught up in a play for the throne, he must work together with Laurent to survive and save his country. For Damon, there is just one rule: never, ever reveal his true identity, because the one man Damon needs is the one man who has more reason to hate him than anyone else. 4 stars. First of all, this book has a lot of trigger warnings. Slavery, rape, pedophilia, and abuse are the ones I can think of. I won't promise I'm not missing any. This one is probably on the more controversial side. I'm pretty sure a lot of people hate this book and series just based on the premise. I don't. This is a reread for me. I heard about this series in 2016 apparently, read it, and loved it. Around the end of last year, I started watching another booktuber, Natcat's Bookish Cafe, where I learned there was a short story collection, which wasn't out when I read them. 8 years being entirely too long, I needed to go through the series again before I could read that. Honestly, I felt a little nervous going in. It's been long enough that my feelings on the series could easily have changed, and I'd be filled with regret for having bought the short stories. Mostly, I think I feel the same now as I did then. The exception being that I think this book was a lot harder to read this time. The situation Damon ends up in is truly awful. Laurent attempts to, and successfully does, some very terrible things to him. It isn't until the last, maybe quarter of the book that they start to tolerate each other, and until then it's very uncomfortable. Seriously, if you have trouble with any of those trigger warnings, approach this one with caution. I can't entirely say I enjoy this book, because the content is so horrible, but I like the way it's written. I like the characters and the ways we start to understand them. And while I don't really enjoy the plot, it is still fairly well plotted. The one complaint I might level at this book, aside from the uncomfortable plot, is that the shift from enemies to allies feels a little too quick. Pacat definitely made an attempt to build the transition, but I just don't think it had quite enough room to breathe. Otherwise, this certainly isn't my favorite book in the series, but it does what it needs to do, and it mostly does it well. That's it for no spoilers. If you don't like spoilers, now is the time to pause or close the video. For everyone else, let's talk details. Damon manages to wiggle out of Laurent's first few attempts to screw him over, literally, and I remember the first time I read this that I really hoped he would keep that up for the entire book. Sadly, he does not. Before long, he gets whipped to within an inch of his life, and once he's recovered, Laurent does eventually succeed in having him raped. Well, depending on your definition of rape, I suppose. He gets an unwanted blowjob, which I consider rape, but might not meet the legal definition. I was not happy about this. I also rather dislike that this doesn't ever really come up after the fact. I think they maybe mention it once, and it's because Damon gets hot for Laurent and remembers the way he guided the other guy in pleasuring Damon. Honestly, this is the worst part of the series for me. Because Damon was a gift from the new king of Achielos, and they are theoretically trying to make peace with Achielos now, Laurent isn't supposed to hurt Damon. So when he has Damon whipped, his uncle the regent gets mad. He's trying to decide what he should do about it, and he asks Damon, who has claimed he was a soldier that got on Castor's bad side, what would happen to a soldier who disobeyed a direct order from their superior. Damon answers this question honestly, that they'd be flogged and dismissed from the army. Afterward, the regent publicly castigates Laurent, stripping him of his properties. Honestly, in the grand scheme of things, it's fairly mild, but afterwards everyone in service to Laurent is pissed at Damon for taking the regent's side over Laurent's. Every time someone gave him shit about it, I kept wondering in what way he took the regent's side. He literally answered a question. What exactly was he supposed to do? Also, since no one was in the room, even if Damon had somehow not answered or had even taken up Laurent's part, no one would know. The regent still would have punished Laurent, so it's not like anything Damon said actually mattered. I kept wanting Damon to say something, but he never did. It was kind of frustrating to me. There is one other thing about this book, and the series in general, that I do take issue with, and it's likely one that puts a lot of people off. Damon is a slave, a sex slave specifically, though that seems to be the only kind in this world, and he hates it. But every other slave we meet, in either this book or this series, is perfectly happy to be where they are. I don't think it was intentional, but by never having someone who was a slave from the start be unhappy about their lot in life, Pacat kind of sends an uncomfortable message that it isn't the institution of slavery that's the problem, but the specific way certain owners treat their slaves. That, and forcing someone who isn't supposed to be a slave into being one. The closest the book comes to addressing this is when Laurent rightfully points out Damon's hypocrisy by asking, more or less, "It's not okay for you, but it's okay for others?" But even with this statement, it's there and gone and never really mentioned again. Because he's been a slave, Damon will eventually become uncomfortable with slavery. But this doesn't come up until the third book, and until then, the message is a little iffy at best. Again, I don't think it was intentional, but it is there, and I don't like it. That's all I have to say about Captive Prince. If you like this video, I hope you'll watch more in the future. Thanks for watching this one. Bye!